The rain came down in sheets. It had been falling since somewhere around Tulsa, chasing the old Jeep Cherokee west along Highway 40 with the kind of relentless patience that made Daniel Hayes feel personally targeted. He didn't mind the rain, usually, but tonight, after 11 hours of driving and 2 wrong turns and 1 gas station that had been permanently closed since approximately 2019, he was tired in a way that went deeper than his bones. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was asleep in the back seat, cheek pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass in small, rhythmic clouds. She had her mother's eyelashes, long and curved and completely at rest, even when the rest of her wasn't. 6 months, Daniel thought. We've been running for 6 months. He pulled into the gravel lot of the Pine Ridge Motor Lodge without any particular optimism. The sign out front was missing 2 letters, so it read Pine IDGMOTL, which seemed about right for how the evening was going. A vacancy light blinked in the window of the front office. Amber. Unreliable. He cut the engine. Sat, for a moment, in the dark. "Baby," he said softly, "we're stopping for the night." Lily stirred, rubbed her eyes with both fists, the way she'd done since she was 3 years old. "Are we safe?" she asked. It wasn't a sleepy question. It was a practiced one, the kind of question that had become morning coffee and evening ritual over the past 6 months. The kind of question no 8-year-old should have memorized. "We're safe," Daniel said. "Come on." He gathered their bags from the trunk, one each a rule he'd instituted the week they left. "You carry what you can carry yourself." He'd said it like a camping philosophy, but they both knew what it really meant. They might have to leave fast. The office door had a bell that jangled when they pushed it open. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked up from a crossword puzzle and gave them both the slow, appraising look of someone who had seen 1,000 tired travelers walk through that door. "Help you? 2 rooms if you have them," Daniel said. He kept his voice even. Easy. The voice he'd spent years cultivating in boardrooms and conference calls. The one that gave nothing away, adjacent, if possible. "My daughter has trouble sleeping alone." The clerk sucked air through his teeth. "Got one problem with that, son. We're down to 2 rooms total. One's the standard double bed, $48. Other one's the suite, $110. Kind of a stretch, but it's got 2 separate sleeping areas." Daniel started to do the math. He was interrupted. "I'll take the suite." The voice came from behind him, cool, precise, with the kind of authority that expected automatic compliance. Daniel turned. A woman stood near the door, shaking rain from a silk scarf with the specific irritation of someone unaccustomed to weather. She was perhaps 45, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, her dark hair pulled back into something between severe and immaculate. Behind her, a younger woman in glasses stood with a leather portfolio and the posture of someone who had learned to be invisible in expensive rooms. This was Margaret Whitfield. Though Daniel didn't know that yet, the clerk looked between them. "Ma'am, this gentleman was here first, and he can have the standard room." Margaret's eyes moved to Daniel, and they were the kind of eyes that price things automatically. His jacket. His shoes. The scuff on the edge of Lily's sneaker. Why waste money on 2 rooms? People in your position should be grateful for options. The sentence landed like something dropped from a height. Daniel felt Lily's hand find his, small fingers curling around 3 of his, the way they did when she was uncertain. He looked down at her at those mother's eyelashes, now wide open, and watching him, and he made a decision. "We'll take the standard room," he said to the clerk. Quiet. "Final. Smart choice," Margaret said, already turning back to the counter. She said it the way people say "of course" when they mean "I expected nothing less from someone like you." Daniel paid in cash. He always paid in cash now. He led Lily down the covered walkway to room 7, and the rain drummed on the awning above them, and neither of them said anything until the door was closed and locked behind them. "She was mean," Lily said. "She was tired," Daniel said. People get mean when they're tired. He believed approximately half of that. Room 7 was exactly what $48 bought in a roadside motel on a Wednesday night in October. A double bed with a comforter the color of dried mustard, a bathroom with adequate pressure and optimistic plumbing, and a window that faced the parking lot. Daniel set both bags down, helped Lily into the bathroom to brush her teeth, pulled the comforter back, and checked for the things you check for in a motel room when you've been on the road long enough to know what to look for. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his palms together and breathed. Day 183. He'd been counting. He wasn't sure if that was healthy or not. Rebecca would have known. Rebecca had known things like that, the difference between productive vigilance and obsessive catastrophizing. The precise point where protective instinct curdled into paranoia. She'd been a therapist before everything happened. Before the diagnosis, before the decline, and the end, and the thing that came after the end, which was this. Lily appeared in the bathroom doorway in her pajamas, toothbrush in hand. "Dad, my tooth is wiggly." He managed to smile. It was, he thought, one of the great privileges of parenthood. The way children calibrated the world back to its actual size. A wiggly tooth. A real problem. A solvable one. "Let me see." She came and opened her mouth wide, pointing with the toothbrush handle at a lower left incisor that was, indeed, dramatically loose. He tested it gently. 2 days, he said. Maybe 3. Does the tooth fairy know where we are? He thought about that. She's got GPS, he said. Better than ours. Lily laughed. The sound filled the small room and made it larger. He tucked her in and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the bathroom light with the door cracked 3 inches exactly, the width that had reliably kept nightmares at bay since she was 5. He sat in the room's one armchair and opened the leather journal he carried, and he didn't write anything. He just held it. 3 hours later, Lily woke up screaming. It was a short scream, the kind that cuts off as quickly as it starts, when the dreamer realizes mid-panic that the room around them is not the dream. Daniel was across the room before it ended. He sat on the edge of the bed and gathered her against him and rocked slightly, back and forth. The way he had done in hospital waiting rooms and the back of taxis, and once, memorably, in the parking garage of a building that no longer existed in their lives. "I'm here," he said. "Right here. Look at me." Her breath came in ragged pulls. Her eyes were wide and glassy. "They were chasing us," she whispered. "In the dream. They were chasing us. And you fell down. And I didn't know how to—" "I didn't fall," he said. "I'm right here. See? Both feet on the floor." He pressed her hand to the carpet, let her feel it. Solid. Real. A technique Rebecca had taught him, once, when the nightmares started. Ground her. Give her something tangible. The nightmare lives in her head. Give her something outside her head. "Can you feel the carpet?" Lily nodded, sniffed. "What does it feel like?" "Scratchy. And a little damp." "That's because it's a $48 motel room," he said. "It comes with atmospheric carpeting." She laughed again, shorter this time, with the hiccup of someone still coming down from fear. But she laughed. He stayed until her breathing settled. Then he sat in the armchair again. He pulled back his left sleeve a habit, checking the time, and the watch was there, as it always was. A Patek Philippe Calatrava, rose gold, 1958 manufacture. It had been his grandfather's. It was worth more than the motel itself. He didn't wear it to make a statement. He wore it because it was the only thing of his grandfather's that had survived 3 apartment moves and 1 estate dispute. He wore it because when he looked at it, he thought, someone before me endured worse than this and came out the other side. He didn't see the face pressed against the window of the adjacent room. Watching. Margaret Whitfield had ordered room service from a place 20 minutes away, a Thai restaurant that delivered, per her assistant Courtney's phone research, within a reasonable radius. She sat at the small desk in the Pine Ridge Motor Lodge suite, eating pad kra pao from a container and reviewing the slides for the investor presentation she was giving in 3 days in Phoenix. She was not thinking about the man in room 7. Then she heard it. The child's scream, short, sharp, followed by silence, and then the low murmur of a man's voice. too quiet to hear through the wall, but unmistakably calm. The cadence of someone who had done this before, regularly. Margaret set down her fork. She had no children. She had, more accurately, made the decision at 32 not to have children, in the same pragmatic way she'd made other significant decisions, by listing the costs against the returns and finding the math unsatisfying. It wasn't that she disliked children. She simply found herself in a category of person who was not built for the particular kind of chaos they introduced. And yet, she found herself standing at the window. Through the gap in the curtains, she could see the walkway. The man from earlier, Daniel, the clerk had called him Sir, hadn't he? Was standing in the doorway of room 7, the glow of the bathroom light behind him. He was looking out at the rain. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, and his arms were crossed over his chest, and he looked like someone standing at the edge of something. Then the light caught his wrist. Margaret Whitfield had been collecting antique watches for 11 years. She recognized the Patek Calatrava the way a sommelier recognizes a first-growth Bordeaux, not by conscious evaluation, but by a kind of whole-body memory. The accumulated weight of expertise. She stepped back from the window. "Courtney," she said. Her assistant looked up from her own laptop. "Yes? That man. The one with the child. Can you find anything on a she?" Paused, realizing she only had a first name. Daniel. Early 40s. Traveling with a daughter. Brown hair. Driving a Jeep Cherokee. And look for Patek Calatrava models from the 1950s, documented private sales in the last decade. Courtney began typing. Margaret returned to her pad crapaud. She ate 3 more bites before Courtney said quietly, "Margaret." She looked up. "I think," Courtney said, in the voice she used when delivering genuinely unexpected information, "you should look at this. There is a particular kind of woman who confuses the experience of poverty with understanding it." Margaret had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Akron, Ohio, the daughter of a woman who cleaned office buildings at night and slept until noon and spent every Sunday watching old films and calling it church. They had not had much. What they'd had was fierce and irregular, like a fire that burns hot but can't be counted on. She had left at 18. She had worked and studied and worked some more, with the particular ferocity of someone who has been told implicitly their whole life that they don't belong anywhere good. She had built Whitfield Capital through 12 years of surgical investment decisions and one brilliant early bet on logistics software that most of her contemporaries had dismissed as a niche play. She was worth, at last count, somewhere north of $400 million, and she had never once stopped being afraid of losing it. This was the thing she didn't talk about. The thing beneath the charcoal blazers and the silk scarves and the assistant with the leather portfolio. Margaret Whitfield, $400 million and counting, woke up at 3 a.m. sometimes and sat in the dark and felt the poverty of her childhood crouching under her bed like it had never really left, like it was just waiting for her to make one wrong bet, one soft decision, one moment of mistaking sympathy for strategy. She had not been kind to the man in the parking lot. She knew it. She had known it even as the words were leaving her mouth. With the slight, embarrassed knowledge that sometimes visits us in the moment of our worst behavior. Ignored because to acknowledge it would require changing course, and she had already committed. People in your position should be grateful for options. She had said it because he was tired and rumpled and paying in cash at a roadside motel. And that combination of signals had triggered something in her, not cruelty, exactly, but preemption. I see you before you can see me. I place you before you can place me. Old armor, the kind you stop noticing you're wearing because you never take it off. The worst part was that she'd let herself do it in front of the child. She remembered the girl's face, not crying, not afraid, just watching, with the patient gravity of someone who has learned to read adult behavior the way navigators read weather. That steady, careful attention. It had unsettled Margaret in a way she hadn't acknowledged at the time. She thought about what she'd said to Courtney, afterward, in the suite. Men who travel with children usually want sympathy discounts. She had not said it to the man. She'd said it to her assistant, which was worse in a way, said it with the easy contempt of someone who expected agreement. who assumed that the person listening shared her taxonomy of the world, her ranking of people by their visible resources. Courtney had not agreed or disagreed. She had written something in her portfolio and said nothing, which was also a kind of answer. Margaret had built her career on reading silences. She had not read that one. Now Courtney had turned the laptop around to show her a Forbes profile from 18 months ago. The photograph was different. The man in the photograph wore a suit, not jeans, and his expression had the managed openness of someone who had been photographed enough times to have developed a corporate face. But the eyes were the same. And the jaw. And something about the way he stood that suggested even through a magazine photograph that the ground beneath his feet was property he owned. Daniel Hayes, 38. Founder and CEO of Meridian Technologies. Estimated net worth, $2.3 billion. Named among the decade's most influential voices in enterprise AI. Margaret read the profile twice. Then she looked at the door between her suite and room 7 section of the walkway. "Courtney," she said, "get me a coffee." And she stopped. "I owe someone an apology." Courtney looked at her with the mild surprise of someone hearing a new word spoken aloud for the first time. He was in the armchair when the knock came. Not the main door, the side door. The one that separated his section of the exterior walkway from the suite's entrance. Tentative, the knock of someone who had thought better of this twice before actually doing it. Daniel didn't move for a moment. Then he got up and opened it. Margaret Whitfield stood in the doorway, and she was not wearing the blazer now. She was in a plain white shirt and had her hair down. And without the armor, she looked considerably more like a person and considerably less like an archetype. "I owe you an apology," she said. "What I said earlier was offensive and unfair." "I'm sorry." He looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching, which he respected. "Thank you," he said. She paused. "I recognized your watch. I collect antique timepieces." And Courtney, my assistant, found the Forbes profile. Daniel said, "I want to be clear that the apology is for what I said, not for who you turned out to be." He considered this, a slow blink. "That's the most honest version of an apology I've received in a while." She laughed a short, surprised sound, like she'd forgotten for a moment that she was capable of it. "I specialize in transactions," she said. "I don't always get the interpersonal side right." "Nobody does," he said. "Do you want to come in? I have terrible vending machine coffee." She hesitated. Then, "Yes. All right." They sat at the small table near the window, him with his vending machine coffee. Her with whatever Courtney had sourced from somewhere, and it was past midnight, and the rain had slowed to a soft hiss against the pavement, and Lily slept behind the half-closed bathroom door. Soundless now. "Why are you doing this?" Margaret asked, after a while. Not unkindly. Genuinely. Daniel turned his coffee cup in his hands. "My wife died," he said. 6 months ago. Rebecca. He said her name the way you say the name of a place you can't return to, with a fullness that carries both the love of it and the loss. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks, from diagnosis to the end. Margaret didn't say "I'm sorry," because it had been said too many times by too many people and had worn smooth and lost its edges. She just listened. "Before she died," Daniel continued, "she told me to disappear." Her exact words. He smiled faintly. She was specific. She said, "Daniel, take Lily and go be nobody for a while. The company will survive. She needs her father to be just her father." He paused. "Rebecca was a therapist. She understood things about people that I'm still catching up to. And the board? The board does not share Rebecca's priorities." He set down the cup. "There's a Faction 3 members, significant holdings, who believe that, with me out of the picture, they can consolidate control of certain assets that were structured in Lily's name as inheritance protections. If they can demonstrate that I'm an unfit parent, a man who resigned suddenly, who's been traveling without fixed address, who appears to be unstable, they can petition for a guardian arrangement that puts Lily's financial interests under their management until she's 25. That's illegal? Arguably. Difficult to prove? Also yes. He looked at her directly. So, I've been moving. Staying small. Waiting for my lawyers to build a countercase strong enough to go to court. Margaret was quiet for a moment. How long can you keep this up? Daniel looked toward the half-open bathroom door. At the small shape, sleeping beyond it. As long as I have to, he said. Rebecca asked me to protect her. I promised I would. The room was very still. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. It was 4 in the morning when the cars arrived. Daniel saw them first 3 black SUVs moving through the parking lot with the particular deliberateness that meant someone knew exactly where they were going. He was at the window before their headlights swept the room. Because in 6 months, he had developed the light sleep of a man who could not afford to be caught unaware. He recognized the lead car. The plates. The dent in the rear quarter panel that his head of security, Graham, had been meaning to fix for 2 years. He exhaled. He put on his jacket and slipped out onto the walkway without waking Lily. The lead SUV's door opened. Graham stepped out, a large, careful man with close-cropped gray hair and the measured movements of someone trained in threat assessment. He looked at Daniel the way people look at things they've been searching for across a long distance. "Sir," he said, "how'd you find us?" "The toll road outside Amarillo," Graham said. "There's a camera at the junction. Our people flagged the plate 4 hours ago." He paused. "Judge Mercer has moved the hearing date. They filed an emergency motion. The petition is claiming parental abandonment." The word landed like a fist in the sternum. "Abandonnement." "When?" Daniel said. 9 days. He stood in the wet parking lot in the dark and felt the particular cold of something closing in. He had known this was coming. He had known for 3 months, with the steady certainty of a chess player who can see the end game from the middle of the board. Knowing it and standing in it were different things. "I'll need everything," he said. "All the documentation. The counsel team. I need to call Hartley in the morning." "Already reached out," Graham said. "And there's one more thing." He handed Daniel a sealed envelope. It was heavy. The kind of envelope that contains documents with legal weight. Daniel opened it and read the first page. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. "Tell the team to hold position," he said. "We're not leaving until morning." "Lily's asleep." Graham nodded. This was not the first time Daniel had made a decision around Lily's sleep schedule. "Of course," he said. "We'll be here." Daniel went back inside. He sat in the armchair for a long time, looking at his daughter in the dark. Margaret had heard the cars from the suite. She'd gone to her window and watched the exchange in the parking lot without fully understanding it, except that the man in the gray t-shirt was now surrounded by people in suits who called him sir, and the economy of deference in their postures said something clear and unambiguous about the actual shape of the situation. She found herself thinking about the woman, Rebecca, the therapist who had died in 8 weeks and who, in the last weeks of her life, had given the most counterintuitive instruction imaginable. Go be nobody. What kind of love was that? What kind of clarity from inside that kind of darkness did it take to see past the wealth and the titles and the machinery of influence and say, "What she needs is just you, just her father, no armor." Margaret sat down on the edge of the suite's bed. She had made a career of identifying value, of looking at a thing and understanding what it was actually worth. Underneath whatever story was currently being told about it, it was, she'd always believed, her greatest skill. But sitting in this motel room at 4 in the morning, she was beginning to understand that she had been pricing things wrong for a long time. She was gone at 6 a.m. Daniel had dozed in the armchair, which he should not have done. And when he woke, the bed was empty and the bathroom door was wide open and Lily's sneakers were missing. The cold that moved through him in that moment was nothing he had words for. He was outside in 30 seconds, Graham and 2 others already moving before he said anything. They covered the parking lot and the road in both directions, and the small convenience store attached to the motel office. Then, Graham's radio crackled. "Perimeter East," said a voice. "Child located. She's okay. She's at the the garden area." "There's a garden area?" The 60 seconds between the empty bed and Graham's voice on the radio were the longest of Daniel's life. Longer than the wait outside Rebecca's oncologist's office. Longer than the flight home from Singapore when Rebecca had called to say the biopsy came back. Can you come home? There was a particular quality to those seconds, a suspension of the ordinary laws of time, where the mind accelerates through every possible version of what might have happened and what it would mean, and the body goes very cold and very still, and utterly refuses to accept that the worst thing is real. He had promised Rebecca. That was the thing underneath everything else. The bedrock of it. He had held her hand in the hospital room on a Tuesday afternoon in April, with the machines maintaining their patient vigil and the sun falling slant across the floor, and she had looked at him with those clear eyes, the therapist's eyes, the ones that saw things as they actually were without flinching, and she had said, "Daniel, whatever happens, whatever it costs, protect her." He had said, "I promise." There is a certain kind of promise that cannot be broken without breaking the person who made it. He knew which kind that was. There was, in fact, a small memorial garden behind the motel, 4 concrete benches and a rose trellis that had seen better decades, surrounding a small granite marker that Daniel hadn't noticed when they'd arrived. A dedication plaque. A woman's name. Lily was sitting on one of the benches, knees together, hands folded in her lap, looking at the marker. Daniel dismissed Graham with a look and walked the rest of the way alone. He sat beside her. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "I woke up early," she said. "I found this." The marker read, "In memory of Ruth Calloway." She loved this garden. 1940. 2019. "She's somebody's mom," Lily said. "Isn't she?" "Probably," Daniel said. "I was thinking about Mom." She was quiet for a moment, doing the internal work of an 8-year-old processing something adult-sized. "I know she's not anywhere you can visit, because we spread her ashes where she wanted. At the lake," Daniel said. "Yes, but sometimes I still want to go somewhere," and she stopped. "Just sit near her." Another pause. "Is that weird?" "No," Daniel said. He felt the words scrape against the back of his throat. "That's not weird at all. I heard Graham last night," Lily said quietly. "About the court thing. About the people who want to take me. He'd been afraid of that." "Baby, I'm not scared," she said. She looked at him with her mother's eyes. "Are you going to let them?" "No," he said. The word was immediate and absolute, the most honest thing he'd said in 6 months. "I am not going to let them." "Good," said Lily. "Because I heard her." "Heard who?" "The lady from last night." "The mean one." She considered. "She wasn't mean when she talked to you in our room." She sounded a search for the right word, real. Daniel looked at his daughter. "When did you become this?" he thought. "When did you grow past where I can see?" "Come on," he said. "Let's get breakfast." Graham found a diner. Margaret was already at the diner. This was not by design. Courtney had found it on a map, and it was the only option within 6 miles, and Margaret had not. When she'd looked at the parking lot that morning and seen Daniel Hayes and his daughter and a small fleet of protective security walking toward it, turned back. She was already seated when they came in. She caught Daniel's eye and gave him the slight nod of someone acknowledging a situation without claiming any authority over it. He sat 2 tables away. Then Lily looked over and waved. Margaret waved back. An involuntary response. 5 minutes later, Lily appeared at her table with the negotiating confidence of someone who has decided something. "My dad says you can sit with us if you want," she said. "He didn't say that, but I think he won't mind." "You're very—" Margaret searched for the word direct. "Mom said direct is better than sneaky," Lily said. Margaret closed her laptop. Breakfast was an unexpected thing. The kind of meal that has no right to be good company but is. Graham sat at the counter with his coffee, professionally invisible. Courtney sat beside him, working, and at a table near the window, 2 people and an 8-year-old ate eggs and toast and talked about nothing particular, and the nothing particular had the quality of something important being laid down quietly. At some point, Margaret said, "Tell me what I can do." Daniel looked at her. "I have resources," she said simply. I have people who specialize in financial litigation, and I know 3 of the 6 members of your board personally, including Garrett Brennan, who I suspect is the architect of this. A pause. His name came up, Daniel said carefully. Garrett Brennan is a man who has turned institutional governance into a personal enrichment strategy for 20 years, Margaret said. He's done it to 4 companies I'm aware of. The mechanism is always the same: create instability at the top, manufacture a vulnerability, exploit the resulting uncertainty. She looked at Daniel directly. He's not doing this because he cares about Lily's welfare. He's doing it because Meridian's AI pipeline is worth $12 billion in licensing potential over the next decade. And if he controls the heir's trust, he controls the board seat attached to it. I know, Daniel said. Then let me help. He was quiet. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Not the financial kind, but the other kind. The assessment of whether a person was worth trusting. Why? He said. She thought about Ruth Calloway's marker in the memorial garden. She thought about a woman who had lived here once, in this small town, and been loved by someone enough to be remembered. She thought about what kind of person plants a memorial garden at a roadside motel. Because, she said, I recognized myself in the way I spoke to you last night. And I didn't like the recognition. The legal team converged on a conference room in Flagstaff over the following 3 days. It was not, as these things go, a dramatic convergence. It was a lot of people on laptops in a room with bad lighting and a whiteboard that kept losing its markers. Graham made a run to a pharmacy for supplies. Courtney ordered lunch in coordinated waves. Lily sat in the corner with a library book she'd found in the motel lobby, occasionally looking up to offer opinions nobody had asked for. Margaret's people came in on the 2nd day. Her litigation specialist, a woman named Catherine Cross, who communicated entirely in declarative sentences and complete paragraphs, spent 4 hours cross-referencing Meridian's board charter with Delaware corporate law, and emerged with a map of exactly where Garrett Brennan's petition was legally vulnerable. The abandonment claim is thin, Catherine said, at the 3rd-day briefing. He resigned from his CEO role with documented notice and structured succession. He maintained full financial support for his child. His travels are unorthodox, but not criminal. The claim relies almost entirely on perception that an unstable man cannot be a fit father. She looked at Daniel. The counter-strategy is simple. We show who he actually is. Not the billionaire, the father. That's what I've been trying to avoid, Daniel said. I know, but avoidance has a cost. The room was quiet. Lily looked up from her book. What's avoidance? She asked. It's when you try not to let people see something, Daniel said. Like when you said you were fine after Mom died? The room remained very quiet. Daniel looked at his daughter. She went back to her book with the placid certainty of someone who has said the exact right thing, and knows it. I'll testify, Margaret said. Everyone looked at her. I was there, she said. I saw how he cared for her. In that motel room, in a diner, in a garden. I'll testify to what I actually saw. She paused. Garrett Brennan wants you to look like a ghost. I'll tell the court what the ghost actually does in the dark, when nobody's watching. Daniel said, You don't have to do this. No, she agreed. I don't. He understood the difference. The hearing was in Phoenix, a family court building on the west side of the city, with the particular bureaucratic fluorescence of places that process enormous human weight every day without comment. Daniel wore a suit for the first time in 6 months. It felt like putting on someone else's skin. Lily wore a green dress that she had picked herself, with the serious deliberateness of a person who understands that what you wear to important things matters. She sat beside Daniel and Graham and their legal team, and she held Daniel's hand under the table, and she was the calmest person in the room. The opposing counsel was a man named Chester Volk, 50s, silver hair, the professional warmth of a man who has learned that juries and judges respond to the appearance of reasonable concern. He laid out the petition with the careful neutrality of someone describing a problem that requires a solution, not an attack that requires a defense. Mr. Hayes voluntarily abdicated his responsibilities as CEO of a major corporation. Mr. Hayes has been traveling without fixed address for 6 months. Mr. Hayes has subjected a minor child to an unstable and unpredictable living situation during a period of acute grief. The minor child requires stability and structure that Mr. Hayes has demonstrated he is unable or unwilling to provide. Each point was technically accurate. Each point was also in the way of things that are technically accurate without being true, a kind of lie. Daniel's attorney, a woman named Priya Hartley, with the contained intensity of someone who saves it for when it matters, made her countercase methodically. Rebecca's letter, written 2 weeks before she died, requesting exactly this period of reduced public exposure for Lily. Documentation of Daniel's continued financial support. School records, maintained through online enrollment, showing Lily had not missed a day of instruction. Medical records showing regular checkups. Then Margaret Whitfield took the stand. She had prepared testimony. She delivered it without notes. She described meeting Daniel at the Pine Ridge Motor Lodge on a Wednesday night in October. She described, with the precise recall of someone who files things carefully, exactly what she had said to him and exactly how he had responded. She did not minimize her behavior. She did not gloss over the contempt she had brought into that lobby. She said it plainly, the way she had once, apparently, known how to be plain before she learned to be strategic. I told him he should be grateful for limited options, she said. He told me that money buys silence, not dignity. He was right. She paused. I spent the next 12 hours watching a man care for his daughter, the way most of us only manage to care for things we have time to prepare for. He was not performing for anyone. There was no audience. There was just a child who needed her father, and a father who was there. She described the nightmare. The way Daniel had crossed the room before the scream finished. The quiet, practiced patience of the rocking. The ground technique. She described the garden at 6 in the morning. A small girl sitting on a concrete bench in the early light, thinking about her dead mother. A man sitting beside her, not filling the silence. Just being there. I'm an investor, Margaret said. I spend my days assessing value. I look at things and try to understand what they're actually worth, underneath the story being told about them. She looked at the judge. What I observed in that motel room, in that diner, in that garden, was a man who had given up the story being told about him in order to protect something he considered more valuable than the story. She paused. In my professional experience, that is exceptionally rare behavior. People do not sacrifice public narrative easily. They do not give up power without a fight. He did. For his daughter. Without hesitation, Chester Volk cross-examined her with the careful precision of a man trying to find a seam. There was no seam. Then, as the hearing was moving toward its recess, Lily stood up. She was not asked to. The bailiff looked uncertain. The judge looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Lily. May I say something? She asked. In the voice she used for things that mattered. The judge looked at her for a long moment. Young lady, he said, this is a court of law. I know, Lily said. That's why I want to say it here. A pause. Go ahead. She stood very straight in her green dress. My dad used to run a big company, she said. He had meetings all the time and his phone never stopped, and sometimes he traveled for 2 weeks, and I missed him even though he video called every day. She folded her hands. After Mom died, he stopped all of that. He just stopped. And then he said, we were going on a trip, just us. And I knew it wasn't really a trip. She looked at Daniel, but I also knew it was the first time since Mom got sick that I had him. Just him. All of him. She looked back at the judge. The people who want to take me say my dad is unstable, but unstable means you can't be counted on. My dad is the most counted on person I know. He just counts differently than he used to. The courtroom was very quiet. That's all, Lily said, and sat down. Judge Patricia Owens ruled in Daniel's favor that afternoon. She did so without drama. She cited the documentation, the testimony, the demonstrated history of consistent care. She noted that the board's petition had relied heavily on optics and lightly on evidence. She declined, with some precision, to characterize Garrett Brennan's motivations. But her language was clear enough that the implication was legible to anyone in the room. Chester Volk left without speaking. Daniel sat in the courthouse corridor for a while after it was over, with Lily against his shoulder, and he let himself be still. Rebecca, he thought, we did it. He wasn't sure where he directed these thoughts. Rebecca had not believed in an afterlife in the traditional sense. She'd believed, more or less, that the people we love become part of the way we process the world, that the dead persist in the living's decision-making, in the reflexes and the values, and the voice that says yes, that's right, or no, that's not who we are. He thought about that. He thought about the lake where they'd scattered her ashes, on a morning in May when the light had been that specific gold that only happens for about 40 minutes and then is gone. He thought about how she would have found it funny. Ultimately, the motel, the rain, the impossible chain of events that had led to a woman who'd insulted him in a parking lot, standing up in a courtroom to defend him. Rebecca had always said, people are rarely the sum of their worst moment. She had been, as usual, right. Margaret was outside when they emerged into the afternoon light. She was standing by a planter, talking on her phone, and when she saw them come through the doors, she ended the call and put her phone in her pocket. She walked toward them without hurry. Well, she said. We won, Lily said, with the simple pleasure of someone reporting a fact. Good, Margaret said. And then, to Daniel's surprise, she said it again quieter, like she was saying it to herself. The way you say something when it means more than one thing. Good. They stood in the parking lot for a while, the three of them, and Graham's team holding a respectful distance. The October sun was doing its best, low and golden, not quite warm but trying. What happens now? Margaret asked. We go back, Daniel said. Not to everything the way it was, but back. He'd been thinking about this for weeks, working out the shape of what return looked like when you'd deliberately unmade yourself and had to put the pieces back differently. I'm going back to the company. Different role, different structure. No more travel that takes me away from her for more than 2 days. No more board dinners that last until midnight. No more. He paused performing. Is that viable? She asked. It was a genuine question, not a skeptical one. I spent 1.5 years letting the company be my life, he said. I'm going to spend the next 18 years letting my life be my life. The company will adapt. Or it won't. It's not the most important thing. Margaret looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and produced a small object. She held it out. It was the key from room 7. The old metal key, not a card the kind motels used to give before everything became a swipe. Daniel looked at it. Where did you get that? I went back to settle our rooms this morning. The clerk had it. She paused. I asked if I could keep it. He took it from her, turned it in his hand. This, Margaret said, is where I learned that the richest people are not always the loudest ones. She said it steadily, without performance. And that I had been confusing the two for a long time. You were afraid, Daniel said. She looked at him steadily. I was very afraid. I built everything I have out of fear. It's not a bad foundation. Exactly, she paused. But it's not a comfortable one. No, he agreed. I'm going to do something with it, she said. The foundation, I mean. I've been thinking about a fund for single parents who need legal support, or financial planning, or just someone in their corner. People who are doing the thing you did, but without the watch. She said it without self-congratulation. It won't fix anything, but it might be a starting point. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Rebecca would have liked that, he said. Margaret accepted this with a small nod. I want to call it the Hayes Foundation, she said. If you'd allow it. He looked at her. Not for you, she clarified. For her. The woman who was clear-sighted enough to know what her daughter actually needed, even from inside a situation where most people would only have thought about themselves. She paused. That kind of intelligence deserves a name on something. Daniel looked away for a moment, toward the highway. When he looked back, his eyes were dry. She would have argued with you about that, he said. She didn't like things named after her. Then she would have been delighted to be argued with, Margaret said. And the foundation would exist anyway. Because she was right. Daniel almost laughed. Almost. Fine, he said. Yes. Use it. Lily, who had been listening with the undisguised attention of someone who believes that important conversations should be listened to, stepped forward and hugged Margaret. Just like that. No preamble. Both arms, decisively. Margaret stiffened for exactly 1 second, and then she didn't. She put one hand on the back of the child's head and held on. You were mean at the beginning, Lily said, her voice slightly muffled by the coat. But you got better. I'm aware, Margaret said. That's good, Lily said. Mom said people who can see when they're wrong are the best kind of people. Because most people can't. Margaret looked, over Lily's head, at Daniel. He smiled, tiredly, like a man who had spent too long pretending he was still okay, and had finally, quietly, stopped pretending. Graham brought the cars around. The team loaded the bags one each, the rule still holding, even if its urgency had passed. Daniel put Lily's bag in the trunk himself. He turned to look at the motel, one last time. The Pine Ridge Motor Lodge stood in the afternoon light, missing 2 letters, imperfect and unremarkable, and exactly what it was. A place people stopped on their way somewhere else. A place that smelled like carpet cleaner and offered $48 rooms and had, for whatever series of accidental reasons, become the location where something important had shifted. He put the key in his jacket pocket next to the folded legal document. He thought about what Lily had said in the courtroom. He counts differently than he used to. He had counted wrong for a long time. The way successful people often do, adding things up by units of influence and capital and scale, and not looking carefully enough at the columns marked irreplaceable and finite and once. Rebecca had understood this before he did, which was one of the many ways she had been more clearly sighted than him. She had seen what he was building toward and understood what it was costing, and she had loved him anyway, and at the end, she had handed him the one instruction that mattered. Go be nobody for a while. He hadn't been nobody. He'd been a father. It turned out those were different things. He'd been a man who tucked a 3-inch bathroom door gap exactly right. Who knew which nightmare required rocking and which required groundedness? Who washed a child's clothes by hand in a $48 motel room because she liked the way they smelled when he did it, different from machines? Who sat beside her in the early morning chill of a memorial garden and didn't fill the silence? Because some silences are not empty. They're full of something too careful to be spoken over. He thought about Garrett Brennan, who would now face the consequences of a failed legal strategy and a public record that described his motivations in unflattering terms. He didn't feel satisfaction about this. Exactly. He felt the quiet of something settled. A weight set down. He thought about the Pine Ridge Motor Lodge key in his pocket. He'd keep it. He thought that someday, when Lily was older and asked about this period, the 6 months they'd been running, the motel, the courtroom, the woman who started as an antagonist and ended as a witness, he would show her the key, and he would say, "This is where I remembered what I was supposed to be." The Jeep Cherokee pulled out of the parking lot at 4 o'clock, with the afternoon sun at its back. In the rearview mirror, Daniel watched Margaret Whitfield stand in the lot until they turned onto the highway, and she disappeared behind the tree line. In the back seat, Lily pressed her cheek against the window and watched the desert unfold. A hawk circled something in the middle distance. A road sign announced a gas station in 14 miles. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah, when we go back," she paused, working out the sentence. "Can we still sometimes just be us, like on this trip?" He thought about that. About motels and diners and rain and memorial gardens and all the unremarkable hours that had turned out to be the remarkable ones. "Yeah," he said, "we can." She nodded, satisfied. Went back to watching the hawk. Daniel looked at the highway ahead. There is a certain kind of wealth that nobody counts in columns. It doesn't compound interest. It doesn't appear on balance sheets. It doesn't increase when markets rise, or diminish when they fall. It's made of ordinary things. A hand in yours in a dark room. A child's breath fogging a window. The space between two people that is not absence but presence. The specific kind of quiet that comes from being precisely where you're supposed to be. Daniel Hayes had been worth $2.3 billion for 6 years. He had been rich, in the way that actually mattered, for the last 6 months. The hawk banked and fell and rose again. The road went on,